think things like having blind applications would be great, so you're bringing people in on the basis of their merit and you're able to understand who they are. But also in concrete terms, on campus, on a day-to-day, it'd be great to have a more formalised network and a more formalised space. I mean, I only know of informal networks and peer-to-peer communications that I have with an odd one or two in my discipline, but there feels to be a lot more compartmentalisation and almost segregation of disciplines and persons, and the sense of isolation that is infecting the space and the sense of competition, to the point that it's eroding any form of solidarity or any form of concrete expectation or even concrete knowledge about what's happening. Any forms of microaggressions or harassments or lack of knowing about policy or procedures. So to try and formalise a network, I think every space should have that particularly, and it should be intergenerational and for both staff and students to err in a very open and in an optimistic, critical way. So we're critical, but we're optimistic. We're not blaming anyone. We're trying to find concrete ways to work out of this precarious situation that we're all in now.
Well, that's a really tall order, and so it's hard to imagine any organisation in this country being free of race discrimination. But as a start in education, we really need to make spaces for black staff to be together, to talk about their experience, but also to establish other ways of valuing work that get fed up and down the organisation and shared by all members of the institution. And that is a way that I think black staff need to work with other quality strands about how we value the different contribution of many different people and stop thinking there's only one way of succeeding in the workplace, which is basically a neoliberal, managerial, really horrible way of being.
Well, I think we have several strands of equality present on the campuses. There's race discrimination activity going on, and there's within UCU there are other strands working as well, and I think we need to be together in fighting the far right threat on the campus, because people are talking about free speech, and under the guise of free speech they are getting away with making very, very racist, Islamophobic, disabling, anti-LGBT plus comments, and I think that's becoming more increasingly louder. And I think the problem is that we're supposed to be getting so good at fighting discrimination, we're not getting good at being together against this threat, which the far right is homophobic, Islamophobic, and disableist. They are doing all those sort of things, and we are not united in going against it. The union isn't getting the same kind of support from staff, and as the members move on to other institutions or retire, there are people with long experience of work and long experience and record of fighting discrimination aren't being replaced, or new ones coming in to take over what they've been doing. And I think it is important for all of us to make sure that we are mentoring younger ones to come up and take over the roles and be the voice against the far right. It's not just the far right. Some of our employers are also complicit in this in order to divide the workforce in any institution.
I think the university needs to set up a system whereby all the staff are audited or monitored to make sure that if they are not progressing, if they are not progressing, then there should be reasons why they are not progressing, and therefore it should be an imperative that the members of staff progress rather than a discretion that they progress, because at the moment it's left to the staff who know how to play the game to progress, and that shouldn't be the case.
I think first of all, it's only we were actually a couple of years without a head of a quality university, and so I think there needs to be the staff and the resources to deal with it. I think there needs to be proper training, because often if there's this sort of online stuff, then it becomes a tick box exercise, and it doesn't really shift people's attitudes. I also think there need to be the structures and processes in place, and I think that the university's policies need to be kind of equality proved. But to do that, it's also a matter of shifting attitudes, because there are some entrenched hierarchies in terms of who is at the bottom and who is at the top, but also some long-standing prejudices, I think, that still exist and exist more so than we'd like to think, I think, in universities. And it's also to do with shifting the attitudes in terms of people's everyday behavior and their speech on that kind of micro level of everyday interactions.
In the first instance, I think universities just need to be more aware. Certainly within my department, we have a very white staff, and there's very little discussion about how anything needs to change in that area. It's a very privileged Russell Group university, and so looking around campus, you see a lot of white faces. So there needs to be much more effort made in terms of recruitment of students and recruitment of staff. And there are various ways in which I think that could be dealt with, one of which would be perhaps to have a look at the management structure and see how much ethnic diversity there was in the management. I have issues with the size of the management, actually, and I think that if some cuts were made there, we could actually have more staff at the grassroots level who are then supported to come up through the system, because as I've explained, there's not really a kind of career progression, and that tends to affect black members of staff more than anybody else. So if we're really serious about this, we need to invest in the grassroots and make sure that there are many more career paths open to people from non-white backgrounds.
Because education is one thing. I don't mean education as in just books, but ensuring that not only the staff, but even the young people themselves are a bit more clued up on how racism can affect them. And then those who are, because racism isn't only just black against white, it is, you have a natural bias sometimes against other students, have it against tutors, and unfortunately, teachers in a position of power can have if they have a subconscious bias, they won't know they're affecting the students' progress. So those kind of things we need to work on. Everybody knows about the very blatant racism, and so things have changed. I think racism has moved away from the more in-your-face to more subtle drip effect. So where even a manager looking at how they timetable you, if they have an issue with you, they make sure your timetable is challenging. A teacher, if they have a particular student who they don't appreciate, or they've typecast already, then they would pick on every small thing and just make that person's life little picks, so that when that student decides to retaliate or express themselves in maybe the only way they can, they put themselves in trouble, and it's nothing to do with me, he or she can just turn and say that. So I think some of that, a different type of education, so people have become more aware when they're doing it. And then from there we could work out, what are those inner feelings you have, where do they come from? Why don't you like that particular person? Is it because they are a particular type? Maybe you remember your family had an issue with something like that in the past, so that's now synced into your psyche. When you see someone who resembles that, you automatically go on defensive. Yeah, so I think there's many things they can do, but that kind of different type of learning would be a great step, I think.